They called it a tragic accident on a lonely stretch of highway. She called it fate, until the truth surfaced under the cold glare of an autopsy lamp. 32-year-old Ananya Sharma had been married for 8 years. By all accounts, she was the kind of woman who could make a home out of bare walls and turn an ordinary dinner into an occasion. Her friends said she had an almost stubborn faith in love, a loyalty that sometimes blinded her to warning signs others could see. One rainy night, her body was pulled from the wreckage of a mangled motorbike. The story was simple. She had been riding home, lost control, and met an untimely end. The police report was stamped and signed. Her husband wept at the funeral. But grief has a way of leaving behind unanswered questions. And for Ananya's brother, something didn't sit right. The crash site seemed too clean. The damage on the bike didn't match the wounds on her face. Days later, when the coroner's report arrived, the room fell silent. There, lodged inside her skull, was the unmistakable shadow of a bullet. This wasn't an accident. It was an execution disguised as one. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We read everyone. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next story. The news of Ananya Sharma's accident spread quickly through the narrow lanes of her hometown. Neighbors came carrying flowers, murmuring prayers and clutching the edges of their shawls tighter against the drizzle. Her mother sat cross-legged on the floor, rocking back and forth, whispering her daughter's name as though repetition could undo reality. Her husband, Rohit, played the part of the grieving spouse flawlessly. He greeted each visitor with glassy eyes and trembling hands. Every so often he would step away from the crowd, bury his face in his palms, and let out a sound halfway between a sob and a sigh. To outsiders, it was the portrait of loss. But in the dim corners of the house, Ananya's younger brother Vikram wasn't convinced. He had been close to his sister all his life. She was the one who taught him to ride a bicycle, who slipped him extra money when their parents weren't looking, who sat up late helping him study. Their bond was more than sibling loyalty. It was mutual survival. When their father died, they clung to each other like lifeboats in a storm. The days following her death were marked by rituals. The scent of incense thickened the air. Relatives recited prayers into the early hours. Rohit sat by the framed photograph of Ananya, stroking the glass with the back of his fingers. Every detail seemed perfectly arranged for mourning. But Vikram noticed other details. Details Rohit seemed too comfortable overlooking. The helmet Ananya supposedly wore was nowhere to be found. The cuts on her hands looked clean, not ragged as you'd expect from asphalt. The motorbike, displayed at the police impound, had a dent on the side but not enough damage to explain the head trauma described in the report. In the weeks that followed, Rohit began spending long hours away from home. He claimed he was struggling with grief, driving aimlessly to escape the memories. Yet more than once, Vikram spotted him in the market, laughing with a woman in bright salwar kameez, a woman who would later become a central figure in the unraveling of this story. Vikram's suspicion deepened into an obsession. He pored over every photograph from the crash site, replayed conversations in his head, and visited the police station under the pretense of checking on the investigation. To his growing frustration, the case remained closed, stamped accidental death. One evening, as the two sat in the courtyard, Vikram confronted Rohit. "You were supposed to protect her," he said, his voice low but unshaking. Rohit didn't answer. Instead, he stood, adjusted his shirt and walked back inside, a subtle display of dismissal that only made Vikram's resolve harder. Then came the moment that foreshadowed everything. While sorting through Ananya's belongings, Vikram found a folded note hidden in her journal. It was just a few lines written in her handwriting. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." The words were underlined twice. Her name was Meera Sethi, 30 years old, hair always perfectly oiled and braided, and a smile that seemed to linger too long on Rohit's face. The first time Vikram saw her up close was at the local grocery store. Rohit was helping her carry 2 bags of vegetables, his hand brushing hers every so often. They laughed in the easy, unguarded way that people do when no one's supposed to be watching. When Vikram appeared, Rohit's expression tightened. Meera, however, didn't flinch. She simply offered a polite smile, as though her presence in his life required no explanation. In the days that followed, whispers began circulating through the neighborhood. A shopkeeper mentioned seeing Rohit and Meera riding together on his motorbike, the same bike his wife had supposedly died on. Another neighbor claimed she spotted them having tea at a roadside stall, Rohit's hand resting casually on her knee. What unsettled Vikram most wasn't just Meera's appearance in Rohit's life, but the timing. It had been only 6 weeks since Ananya's funeral, and yet her framed photograph had already been moved from the living room to a dim corner of the bedroom. The garland of marigolds had wilted and been discarded. The incense sticks were gone. The morning rituals had evaporated, replaced with the smell of a new perfume lingering on Rohit's shirts. When Vikram tried to talk to his mother about it, she dismissed his concerns. "People grieve differently," she said. "Maybe he's just trying to move on." But Vikram knew his brother-in-law. This wasn't grief, this was substitution. One afternoon, while collecting some of Ananya's clothes from the house, Vikram heard the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway. Meera was there, sitting at the same table where Ananya used to serve chai. She was wearing Ananya's apron, a faded floral print that had always hung by the window. Rohit stood beside her, leaning in close, showing her how to roll out dough for parathas. It wasn't just Meera's presence that stung, it was the replacement of rituals. The paratha dough was something Ananya made on Sundays, a tradition between her and Rohit, now that intimacy was being rehearsed with someone else. Vikram couldn't hold his tongue any longer. "She's wearing my sister's apron," he said flatly. The laughter stopped. Rohit's eyes hardened, but Meera's remained neutral, almost amused. "It was hanging there," she said softly. "I didn't think it mattered." Later that night, Rohit confronted Vikram privately. His voice was low, but the threat was unmistakable. "You need to stop hanging around here so much," he said. "You're making things uncomfortable." It was then Vikram realized that Meera wasn't just a new friend or confidant. She was becoming a fixture, a replacement, a woman stepping into Ananya's space with such ease it felt rehearsed. The final blow came a week later, when Vikram overheard a conversation between Rohit and a mutual friend. The words were casual, almost celebratory. "Once the paperwork's done, Meera and I can finally live without all this pretending." Paperwork. A chilling word when spoken by a man whose wife's death had been labelled an accident. The threat of replacement was no longer just emotional, it was a permanent shift. And for Vikram, it cemented one thing. Whatever happened to his sister, Meera was at the centre of it. From the outside, Rohit seemed to be settling into his new normal. He went back to work, kept up appearances at family functions, and even invited Vikram over for tea one afternoon, as if to prove there was nothing to hide. But Vikram knew enough to look beneath the surface. At first, it was the little things. Meera's motorbike parked discreetly 2 streets away from Rohit's house. Her sandals placed neatly by the back door. A quiet suggestion she'd been inside for more than just a cup of tea. The faint outline of a second toothbrush in the bathroom. Neighbours whispered that Rohit had changed. He no longer wore the subdued white shirts common in mourning. Instead, his wardrobe had shifted to crisp, colourful prints. He'd been spotted buying gold bangles at a jewellery shop, a gift, no doubt, but certainly not for his late wife. One evening, Vikram lingered in his car outside the house after dropping off some papers. Through the half-drawn curtains, he caught a glimpse of Rohit and Meera sitting close together on the sofa. She was laughing, head tilted back, while Rohit showed her something on his phone. It looked harmless, but the ease between them spoke volumes. Later, Vikram learned from a family friend that Rohit had been asking unusual questions. How long after a spouse's death could one legally remarry? What was the fastest way to transfer property titles? The accident that took Ananya's life had been quick, brutal, and, according to police, unavoidable. She'd been riding pillion on Rohit's motorbike when it supposedly skidded on a wet road. No eyewitnesses, no CCTV. A closed case, until the autopsy revealed the truth. A bullet lodged in her skull. If the murder had been planned, then the weeks before Ananya's death must have been the staging ground, and now, in hindsight, those weeks seemed full of careful orchestration. Rohit had taken Ananya on more evening rides than usual, sometimes returning late, claiming he needed to clear his head. He'd stopped letting her visit her brother without him. And tellingly, he'd begun taking out small insurance policies, not in his name but in hers. The last Sunday before the accident, Ananya had posted a photo on her social media. She was standing on the balcony, smiling, with a caption that read, "Some days feel heavier than others." No one thought much of it at the time, but Vikram would later replay those words over and over, wondering if she had sensed the shift, the coldness creeping in, the shadow of someone else moving into her life. Behind closed doors, Rohit and Meera were building a future. But for that future to exist, Ananya's presence had to be erased. Not slowly, but completely. And if the whispers were true, the erasure had already been set in motion long before the night of the so-called crash. The night of the incident was warm, the kind of night that lulls small towns into an easy calm. Rohit told neighbours he and Ananya were heading to visit a relative 2 towns over, just a quick ride, nothing unusual. They left together on the motorbike around 8:30 p.m. Ananya wore a pale blue scarf, her hair tied back, holding on to Rohit as they sped down the dimly lit road. Somewhere along the stretch where trees swallowed the moonlight, Rohit slowed. What happened next would never be seen by human eyes, but the autopsy would later piece it together. The gunshot was delivered at close range, angled downward, suggesting the shooter was in control of both the bike and the weapon. Ananya likely never saw it coming. The bike and her body were found in a shallow roadside ditch, positioned to suggest a skid and fall. Rohit's shirt had faint marks of road dust, but his injuries were minimal, too minimal for the violence he described. He told police they'd hit a wet patch, that he'd blacked out briefly, that he awoke to find her lifeless. His voice cracked, his hands shook, and to anyone watching, he played the part of the devastated widower well. By morning, condolences had begun pouring in. Neighbours lit incense sticks outside his home. Meera was nowhere to be seen in public, but one witness would later claim they saw a woman matching her description walking along a back road the same night, wearing a shawl that hid her face. For a week, life seemed to return to routine. But behind that calm, the truth sat waiting, in the form of a single bullet embedded deep inside Ananya's skull, silent proof that her death had never been an accident. The first cracks in Rohit's version of events appeared when the local police received the autopsy report. Instead of a skull fracture from impact, the coroner noted a clean circular entry wound hidden under her hairline, the unmistakable mark of a bullet. The exit wound had been masked by bruising from the fall. The news shifted the case overnight. The accident was now a homicide, and the man who had been seen sobbing in the street was suddenly a prime suspect. Police quietly reopened the scene. Tire marks didn't match a sudden skid. They were too controlled, too deliberate. And the ditch where Ananya had landed was only a few feet from a stretch of road with no sign of collision debris. When investigators traced Rohit's phone records, they found a flurry of late-night calls and encrypted messages to Meera, many within hours of the so-called accident. The tone shifted from anxious to celebratory. One, sent at 2:17 a.m., simply read, "It's done." Neighbours began to talk. Some recalled seeing Meera and Rohit together in cafes far from town. One shopkeeper admitted he'd overheard them discussing how things would be easier once the problem was gone. The final blow came from ballistic testing. A small caliber pistol, recovered from a rented locker registered under Meera's cousin, matched the bullet in Ananya's skull. In court, Rohit kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with Ananya's family. Meera sat stone-faced, her defense arguing there was no physical proof she was at the scene. But the jury didn't buy it. Both were convicted, Rohit for murder, Meera for conspiracy. Rohit received life in prison, Meera 20 years. Today, the bullet that ended her life remains sealed in an evidence bag in the district archives, a silent reminder that not all accidents are what they seem.